Hello, and welcome to the Data Driven Supply Chain Podcast, your source for manufacturing news and latest happenings in the supply chain industry. We have with us my usual partner in crime, Yacine, and our guest today is the CEO of Axya, Felix, a great friend and someone I look up to, especially when it comes to disrupting a traditional industry. More on that, but first, let's start off with an introduction of our guest. So, Felix, if you could tell us a little bit about your background and yeah, what's up? How did you get into this industry?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Felix. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Axya. I have a mechanical engineering background, and I also studied anthropology. I've always been fascinated by community, collaboration, communication, and actually, my first work experience was a combination of the mechanical engineering background and anthropology. I was working at Bombardier Aerospace, and I was in charge of supplier quality. So I had to work with a big ecosystem of partners. And my job was super exciting. I was in charge of what we call a QIR, so it stands for Quality Inspection Requirement. And basically, when we have an issue with an aircraft in service, they would send a short report to the factory. And my job was to coordinate with different team and suppliers to find the root cause of that problem. It was super exciting. I've learned a lot about supply chain, aircraft. But the thing that really shocked me at the time was the way we communicate with our suppliers. So I was using email, telephone, and even faxes in some cases to get the information. And that information was gathered using Excel spreadsheet and a handwritten note. So it was an amazing experience, but at the time I was thinking maybe there's a better way to structure all that knowledge and make it accessible to work.
Super interesting. I like the comment about the communication. Can you give us a bit more like a visual on this? Because in my head, there's a quite of a contrast between like how much the engineering is like cutting edge and how much the information is absolutely not. So can you paint us a bit of a picture over here?
Yeah, so let's say we have an issue with a metal component that was machined 2 years ago and with a special configuration. Just to make sure that it's the actual right part, we need to find the supplier in the ERP. So to do that, I would go see one of my colleagues, ask them which supplier could have done the part. We would dive in together. ERPs are not really systems that are made to come across new information. If you don't know exactly where to look at, it's really hard to get that. So I needed to leverage my colleagues' expertise about the different component we were working on. After that, we find a supplier vendor, and then I had to call them. But the log of the part that they manufacture is not always super accurate. So sometimes they would take the print sheet with handwritten note from the engineers or the machinists who did the part. They would send that back to us, and we had to validate, was that the right design or not? So I was printing those information and tracking, and it was working. It's not the information is not accurate. It's just accessing that information was super challenging. And yes, I think that was a good example of we start from this super advanced CAD model, but when we get into the problem solving, paper and pen is the best way to go.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So, a bit of maybe a personal question and more of also professional in there is like, somebody young as you, having mechanical engineering background, dream job in Bombardier. Why would you leave all of that and why go and do something of your own to solve that problem?
Well, actually, it started with my roommate who invited me to take part in hackathon. I knew basic programming, but I wasn't a real programmer. But I love problem solving. So he's like, "Oh, come with us with some friends, and we'll build cool stuff during the weekend and try to win prizes." And that was my first real innovation exposure and even entrepreneurship, because through those competition, we built some small platform software, and I was like, all right, I actually really love starting from a problem and building the solution to tackle that challenge. And one of the competition led us to join an accelerator, and in that accelerator, we actually built what is Axya today. But At the time, I was still working at Bombardier, and I was sharing some of my ideas with my managers, and I had a specific objective to hit, and building the company and working at Bombardier were not compatible. So I had to take a decision, and happy I was supported in that transition. But I decided to dedicate all my time to building what is Axya today, and still support the aerospace industry, but in another way.
Well, that's pretty interesting. Like I get that this is how this thing is started, but like, did you thought at the time that the problem that you've seen way back, where you will be kind of solving this information problem in aerospace with the thing that you were kind of starting to build?
Actually, one of my initial hypotheses is that we wouldn't work with the aerospace industry before year 5 or even year 10, because as a super advanced industry, they need technology that are de-risked before they can be used. And as a startup, I was aware that we would need time to build that credibility. But I was already aware that the information problem in the manufacturing industry was a great opportunity for us. So one of the first things that we've done when we launched the company was a lot of discovery call with potential customers. So machine shops, purchasing department, engineering department. And that's where we really understood that the process to identify a supplier, get prices, and selecting that supplier was very different from one company to another. But the common thing was the tool that they use. As currently the market leader is Gmail. So that's how they target their supplier and get the information. And so that's the initial problem that we ran after. We started with some smaller companies to really test the product. And another exciting thing is that before the product was even released, we were able to sell membership to access the platform in its beta form. So it was for us a strong validation that the industry was looking for a product that, like the one we were building, and having early adopters participating in the development of the solution would be key in our success. So yeah, to go back to your answer, aerospace, not at first, maybe in the future of the company. That was my initial hypothesis. And we went after manufacturing companies.
That's fantastic. Kind of a paradoxical question, because like we're not talking about small shops here. We're talking about like some of the biggest aerospace manufacturer in the world, kind of all struggling with the same thing. They have means to buy tools and stuff like that. Why do you think that is? That they're not able, I don't know, to like home bake it into their ERP, like something to help them collaborate with their suppliers. Why do you think that this thing is not this type of information sharing is difficult for a company like that to do, and to revamp a bit their information structure?
Well, I think that initially the ERP were built to store the information and not necessarily to dynamically search in it and make quick analysis, for example, in sourcing of who could be the right suppliers. They're not built to do that. And 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you could hire a team of experienced buyers who would have to source some parts. So with the existing tech stack, they were able to do their job properly. But I think with the recent shift in the market, sourcing need to be more dynamic. It's a more complex process, as we've seen with all the disruption that happened recently. You need real-time information about your supplier base. You need to be able to identify new potential partner really quickly and streamline the communication and collaboration with them. And the tech stack haven't followed that trend quickly. And another big challenge for the manufacturing industry is the labor shortage. So you can't double the size of your purchasing team by snapping your fingers. The problem is more complex, and the tech stack didn't follow. So I think that's why we need the solution like the one we're building.
Super interesting. So like, if I recap what you're saying, like innovation is absolutely critical on this front. And now, because there's much more of these disruption and much more need for flexibility and speed.
Yeah, and maybe another thing that is used to work well is that big companies could impose their software to their supplier and say, this is how you work starting now. But with globalization, suppliers start to work with 5, 10, 20, 50 different buyers, and now being imposed a software that is not aligned with the way they operate is a challenge. And the dynamic has shifted. Now the power is on the supplier side. I've talked with suppliers recently that told their clients, starting next month, I'm not using your software. I don't want to pay for that. You'll need to receive my quote through this workflow. And if you're not interested, I'm not quoting anymore. And the buyer had no choice to adapt to the supplier behavior because of those new market dynamics.
Cool. So yeah, one question, Felix. On LinkedIn, I've seen you've been pretty much traveling with a lot of aerospace executives here and there. So what was, and I know you're also part of the delegation that went to Europe. What were some of the key learnings or key takeaways from that trip that you had, especially touching back on the aerospace sector? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the top priority in the aerospace industry, and it's something I've heard a lot in Europe, it's the zero emission journey. How can we build aircraft that are emitting zero emission, no carbon emission, and the way to achieve that by 2050, which is one of the objectives, for example, at Airbus. I think Safran is also aligned with those type of targets. To do that, you need to innovate on multiple small things. It's not just one disruptive technology that will change the way the aircraft are built. They'll need new technology, new material, and a lot of different solution will come from partners. So the way innovation is being put in place in Europe is really through big collaboration, identify potential small startup that can contribute into a specific component of the process, and they support them. So Safran has been a leader in that approach of identifying companies that have super exciting technology and supporting them and making sure that what they're building is actually aligned with what Safran needs. And I think it's a really interesting way of innovating, and it's required. If we don't do that, I don't think we'll hit those objectives by 2050. So that's one of the big trend I've seen. Another common thing is, of course, supply chain disruption. How can we adapt? And there's two solutions. The first one is that you need to really be agile. So have multiple options and being able to switch from one to another with minimal impact on the way you operate. Multiple strategies are put in place to do that, but it's really a priority for procurement executives. And the other one is visibility. How can you reduce your risk? If you're not aware of what are the problems, it's really challenging. So being able to monitor in real time your supply chain, what is currently happening and what you are expecting. So I've talked with executives that are trying to create some dashboard to track their supplier performance. Communication channels that are optimized with their internal team, but also with their external suppliers. So this is another exciting trend, and I think that Axya is something that we were aware of and we thought about for years. But now seeing that the industry is shifting in that direction, it's becoming one of the top priority. Is a good opportunity for us.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. One question before, I know Yacine is sort of itching to ask a question, but I wanted to do a follow-up question to that, which is very interesting. I was reading about secondary emissions, and it's kind of like a even bigger pie what secondary emissions are like. So even if you have a pretty good setup in terms of carbon footprint, your suppliers might have something terrible and you're contributing to that. So that sort of lines up very, very nicely with what you're doing with Axya. And just one question out of curiosity, why do you think Axya has been so successful in the aerospace sector, where the perception that a person would have about aerospace is it's crazy advanced and it sort of touches on borderline artificial, and there's a lot of stuff going. But why do you think Axya had such a good impact?
Well, I think in this specific case, timing is everything. So some of the problems that we've been tackling for years now were not the top priorities in those large companies. But now with the supply chain disruption, the labor shortage and the desire to innovate to tackle those challenges, we see companies like Airbus, Pratt and Whitney, G Aviation, working with a company like ours because they really need to quickly put in place a solution. So I think it's really the timing that allowed us to work with those companies, and we've been working really hard in transforming those early users into really great example of what the technology can do. And that was one way to showcase that Axya is now a company that has a mature product adapted to the industry, aerospace industry, and that's how we were able to onboard more clients with similar challenges and infrastructures.
Fantastic, and a great comment, Ahmad, on the secondary emission thing, because I can kind of see a trend, like in aerospace. A lot of the issues are related to your suppliers, because you can't do everything yourself. You have to have partners, and then they're specialized in their stuff. How do you feel that this is impacting, like, all of these different targets of, let's say, hey, I want to ensure that my data is all centralized into my spot, but the supplier is emitting this data. I want to reduce my GS emission, but the supplier is also contributing to that thing, like, quite heavily. How do you do that? How do you, in this space, ensure that there is good collaboration and that we can all work together to get stuff fixed?
Yeah, I think here it's another example where the first step is really visibility. You need to be aware of what is the emission of your suppliers. We see some companies that require it for their supplier to be able to quote on specific projects. You need to show that you have a specific standard in terms of a carbon footprint. It's a new trend that we're starting to see. So once you're able to map your supply chain and the type of emission that they have, the next step is to identify the changes that are required. And to do a change, you need to identify a problem, but also a solution. So we've seen some suppliers that not suppliers, but buyers who said those parts can be sourced in Canada. We don't have the supply chain; it's not competitive enough. But with COVID, they were forced to source back in Canada. In the specific case I'm thinking about with Vention, they had to source back in Quebec. And they found a more competitive supplier that was able to provide the same part, same quality, but 200 kilometers away from the shop, rather than being hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away and being shipped overseas. So I think once you identify a problem, you find the solution with the proper research, you can really shorten those supply chain or work with partners that really lower carbon emission.
I think fantastic answer, but I'll play devil advocate here, and I would say, like, if you do have the visibility, you already solved one of the core problem, which is getting the data, right? Because on all of these stuff, the data is on the supplier side, right? So I'm going to push you on this. How let's say, an aerospace company, can get my suppliers to adopt X, like a technology or whatever it needs, to give me this visibility in order to do something about it. And maybe an example from Axya would be cool here, and how you even get that going in such a space.
Yeah, so I think you're touching a really important point. Suppliers and any partners need to collaborate in that process to be effective. But one of the challenges that we hear a lot is that collaboration is either costly, time-consuming, or even problematic. So you need to find a way to simplify the sharing of that information. It is one of the main problems that we tackle at Axya. We made sure that the product was built to support the supplier behavior. It was built with suppliers. On a weekly basis, we would show them the platform, how it evolved, how they could access some of the key information outside of the platform by email, for example, and be able to provide the key data point to their partners without changing the way they work. Because if you put too much friction in those type of process, the reflex is, you know what, I will not do it. You won't have your quote, you won't have your data, and I'll work with somebody that it's nice to work with. So all the engineering was around the workflow and how we can make it simple.
And they end up sending your code via faxes, right?
Yeah. We talked about a supplier that is as a colleague, and her job is to print the quote, annotate them with hand, and fax that information back to the buyer. And it works. I don't think it's the most optimal way of doing it, but they're a successful business, and they decided to go with that route.
Well, at least they're not using pigeons, right? So, yeah, still.
Not anymore.
Cool. So, Felix, we're running a bit short on time. Any last words, any last piece of advice that you'd like to give to our listeners out there?
Yeah, so I think it's a really exciting time for the manufacturing industry. I think the what we've seen with COVID was just a wake up call. The problem have always been there. It's just that the manifestation of those problems was problematic, was leading to new changes and innovation. And I think with the new priority on flexibility, visibility, collaboration, I think we're entering in a new era of supply chain management. And that's why we built Axya, to allow companies to focus on the collaboration with their partners, while our platform, our system, take care of all the manual work, data manipulation. And it's been a successful year. 2022 has been the best year for the company. We signed exciting clients like Airbus, Pratt& Whitney, GE Aviation, and now that we're working with those leaders in their own industry, we showcased that the company was ready to deploy in the aerospace. So super excited to see how 2023 will unfold, but definitely a lot of collaboration with aerospace leaders.
Awesome. Great to hear that. Congratulations on that. So, yeah, thank you so much, Felix, for your time. We appreciate you sharing all those nuggets of wisdom. I'm quite sure tomorrow all of the engineering listening of our podcast is going to submit their resignations and start off companies to solve exciting aerospace problems. So yeah, if you guys have any questions for Felix, don't hesitate to reach out to him through LinkedIn. I guess that's probably where he's easily available. And yeah, that will be all from our side today. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Stay tuned and hit subscribe to get more updates. That's all for today.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a real pleasure sharing my personal journey, and excited to listen to the next episode. Have a great day, everyone.